Well, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm speaking with one of our favorite people today. It's Harley Schlanger, the national spokesperson for LaRouche. And Harley's back on the line to talk about all things economy and the drumming that the Democrats took on November 4th. Although, believe me, neither of us are under any illusions that things will get all peachy and perfect and constitutional again under the GOP. Harley, how are you?
I'm fine, Sean. Nice to talk with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and it's been too long. I wanted to talk to you about the November 4th election and the absolute rejection of all things Obama. Now, this would include the rejection of Obamacare, the rejection of the out-of-control IRS, the rejection of the out-of-control Justice Department and Eric Holder, the rejection of the out-of-control State Department and Hillary Clinton. But as I stated in the introduction here, Harley, you and I are under no illusions that the Republicans are going to return us to strictly a constitutional form of government by and for the people. Let's just talk about the crushing defeat of Obama on November 4th. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it's fairly straightforward. The people who voted have expressed their contempt and their anger at the direction of the country and have put it on Obama. You know, this was not an anti-incumbent election because people like McConnell won. Some of the other Republicans who people thought were in danger, like Pat Roberts, they won. It was a rejection of the Democratic Party. And I think there's another factor to it, which gets at this question of, was it an endorsement of the Republicans? It was an extremely low turnout. Large numbers of people did not vote. They were expressing contempt for Obama, but no support for the Republicans. So it wasn't as though this was a sweeping win for the Republican message, because the main Republican message was, we're not Obama. And for the people who voted, that was enough. Now, I think with all the things you mentioned, I like to always look at things from the top down. And I think the most important thing is that the American people are smart enough to know that Obama is lying when he was going out talking about the Great Recovery. That for most people, there's not only no recovery, but they've not even caught up to where they were in 2008. Secondly, you cannot feel any security with Barack Obama as the commander-in-chief when his policy in Ukraine is to push us to the point of a war with Russia, and his policy in the Middle East is to ally with the very forces who worked with him to build up ISIS. So I think on those two issues, you have a complete and total rejection of Obama. Now the question is, have the Democrats learned a lesson, and have the Republicans? And I think that's the thing that we've got to do, put forward some solutions now.
Well, one of those solutions would be to impeach Obama, although at this point he is a bit of a puppet with very little power. Now, one of the things, though, that he's doing, which is really beyond the pale, is he's talking about executive action in terms of providing amnesty for those who are here illegally. We should talk a little bit about that. He is a criminal. He behaves like a criminal. And even when he's backed into the corner and he's lost all the mandate of the people, he still wants to behave criminally. But circling back here, you mentioned Putin. You mentioned the war drums against Russia. Obama is certainly not alone in that. As we consider what we've put in the framework of the New World Order, those above Obama, the puppet masters, the people at the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, NATO, this world government infrastructure has been beating the drums for war with Putin. And at the G20 here just the other day, it was Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper who said to Putin, quote, "I guess I'll shake your hand, but I only have one thing to say to you. You need to get out of Ukraine," end quote. And Putin, who was quite, I think, angered by the experience, replied, "This is impossible because we are not there," end quote. Harley, where should we go? Because we know that the war drums beating for war with Russia are beating from the New World Order, these controllers of what would otherwise be a world government. And I am concerned with Obama's criminality as it relates to immigration.
Let's start there because it'll lead us right into the war question. And you're right that it's not just Obama. He is a puppet of a financial network that's out to destroy national sovereignty. And what you have with Putin, with President Xi of China and others, is they won't give up their sovereignty. The Indians won't give up their sovereignty. The Brazilians won't. But the Americans so far seem to have been willing to give up their sovereignty. And that brings us to this question of what, on the immigration, let me just say something simple. Look, Obama's been using executive orders for the last 3, 4 years to do all sorts of things. So it's not just that now he's going to do it for immigration, so he's impeachable. The Republicans think that now that there's a majority Republicans in the Senate, they can impeach him, but they don't have the votes yet. The immigration issue is a trap for the following reason. What Obama's going to do is wrong, no question about it. He's doing it deliberately to provoke certain Republicans into a flight forward, so you'll never get a bipartisan commitment to impeach him, because Obama will be able to rally what's left of the Democrats to support him on this. So that's a trap. Why should he be impeached? Because he's worked on behalf of Wall Street banks to criminally throw people out of homes, to bail out these banks where they're putting them in jail, the bankers in jail, they've been bailing them out. He lied about what the U.S. did in Libya in violation of the War Powers Act and the Constitution. He's done the same thing in Syria. If the Republicans are serious about impeaching him, they should be listening to what Senator Rand Paul is saying. And here's where I think we get to the real nub of the issue. You want to get Obama out, you need to approach this war question and his illegal assertion, his right to go to war without the Congress. If you want to impeach Obama, there are two issues that are compelling and which might allow for a bipartisan approach, which is the only way you'll get enough votes to throw him out. And this is what Senator Rand Paul has been discussing. One is his criminal assertion of his right to deploy American troops without going to the Congress. He did that in Libya, and of course the Libya thing feeds into Benghazi and the whole commitment of the United States under Obama to arm the terrorists in ISIS and al-Nusra Front in Syria and Iraq. Secondly, and there are Democrats, such as Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia and Senator Murphy of Connecticut, who would work with Rand Paul on that issue because they're opposed to the idea that Obama can send troops in at his own on his own whim. Secondly is the surrendering of sovereignty of the United States to these international banksters. That's a violation of the Constitution. And I think you could make a case that would be strong enough to get bipartisan support to throw him out now, because there's not many people who support him. And Sean, just to go back to the election for one moment, the Obama supporters are saying, well, the Democrats lost because they ran away from Obama. They were running away as fast as they could because they know if they embraced Obama, they would have lost much bigger. The proof of that is Maryland, the so-called blue state, where the lieutenant governor he brought Obama in, he embraced Obama. He had a 10-point lead going into the week before the election. Obama came in for a rally, and he ended up losing. So Democrats have no reason to stick with Obama right now, especially because Obama's policies are the same globalist policies that people like John McCain on the Republican side are supporting. So that's where Senator Paul, I think, is the only Republican so far that has presented a thoughtful, mature approach to impeachment. And I think that for Senator Paul, it would be well worthwhile looking on the Democratic side and going to some Democrats who also share his concern about Obama's abuse of the War Powers Act and the Constitution.
Well, it would be terrific if Rand Paul is the bright spot for us. Those of us who are libertarians do look to the Paul family as being sort of beacons of hope. I know many of the listeners take issue with some of Rand Paul's positions. I think he's a little too snuggly with the state of Israel as being one of his criticisms, but he is out there speaking truth, is he not? What is your take on Rand Paul right now?
Well, if people are worried about the Israel connection, everyone else running is worse than him. And I think he may be educable on that. I think once he realizes the connection between the Israeli policy and the global banksters, I'm not too worried about what he would do as president on that. The most important issue for the United States right now is breaking with the international networks of bankers, which includes Wall Street, the City of London, as you mentioned, NATO, the European Union. These are institutions whose intent is to take sovereignty away from the United States.
Right.
And that means attack our Constitution. Now, Obama, if there's a constitutional clause which he has not violated, I wouldn't know about it. I think he's given us so many reasons for impeachment but you have to pick at the most important ones. And that's why I appreciate, and I know Mr. LaRouche recently commented that he appreciates what Rand Paul did in the way he framed the War Powers Act. You know, under the War Powers Act, Obama should have gone to the Congress about 3 weeks ago on the question of the troops that we've sent into Iraq. He not only didn't do it, but he said he doesn't have to.
That's 1,500 troops, right, Harley?
Well, there's about 1,500 now, and he said he was going to send 1,500 more. Mm-hmm. So you see what they call mission creep already. Those of us old enough to remember Vietnam remember this is how he got stuck in there. And Obama is saying that he can use he says different things. One is he says he doesn't need the congressional approval, which is a direct assault on the Constitution. But secondly, he has been saying that he can use the authorization to use military force from 2001. And this is where some Democrats are saying this is not acceptable. And again, I mentioned Murphy and Tim Kaine as the most outspoken. But then if you look at the broader question of war and peace, you come up with the NSA scandal. And this is where you have other Democrats like Senator Wyden. You have the 28 pages on the Saudis as to the Saudi role in 9/11 and the continuing Saudi role to support jihadists in league with Obama. So these are I think, the most important war and peace and prosperity issues where he is not only at odds with the Constitution, but in total violation. And that's what Rand Paul said a few days after the election. And so putting aside partisanship, he put his finger on the real issue. And I think that's where we have to go. And that's what I'm telling Democrats. You stay with Obama, not only are we going to lose the Democratic Party, but we're going to lose the country.
Yeah, that's right. And, I want to just let people know the reason I brought up Rand Paul, and I wanted to touch on that, is because if everyone recalls back in March at CPAC, Rand Paul was the overwhelming choice of those in attendance with 31 votes. Ted Cruz came in second with 11. Neurosurgeon Ben Carson had 9. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, 8. Rick Santorum, Scott Walker, Mark Rubio at 6, right on down the line. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because what we are going to see as we move into the next election in 2016 is we're going to see the Mockingbird mainstream media and the powers that be that control it pushing Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton down our throats, despite the fact that nobody wants them. There has been, Hillary in particular has been completely rejected by the voters in terms of her relationship and her affiliation with the criminal government and her crimes with Benghazi and her crimes, her endless litany of crimes in the Clinton crime family and their relation to the Bush family. Again, it's this dictatorship. It's this Bush-Clinton dictatorship that they want to force on us for literally decades at this point, Harley. And I think the American people are finally awake. Anyway, Rand Paul appears to be a real grassroots choice, just like his father was, Ron Paul, because at least he isn't bought and paid for by these same powers, the Clinton-Bush powers.
And Sean, I think at this point, in reflecting on the election, while you have Ted Cruz out there saying that the big issue is immigration, you have McCain saying the big issue is Obama's not tough enough in confronting Putin and confronting Assad, you have elements in the Republican Party that I think are marching to the same tune as Wall Street. And Rand Paul does not. The Israel question is an important one because too many on both parties, in fact, 99 senators voted to support Israel with their genocide in Gaza. So I think this is a problem that's going to have to be fought out. But I think on the balance, what Senator Paul has demonstrated is that he's not going to fall into a trap. And Obama, look, the people who run Obama and the mainstream media, they want to make immigration the issue because it's divisive. And what we need right now is an approach which pulls the country together around this question of, are we going to have a future? And Hillary Clinton has disqualified herself, if for no other reason than her continued support of Barack Obama. As for Jeb Bush, the Bush family should have disqualified itself, given the lies that were involved in Iraq, the huge buildup of debt around that war, the bailout. So you have in both parties, the mainstream of the party has been rejected by the population. But Cruz and others have taken that as a robust endorsement of the Republicans. And I think a lot of Americans have just become pessimistic and cynical because they don't trust anybody. But when you get someone talking about issues in a very clear way, the way Senator Paul has on this war question, I think that sticks. And that's why I would urge him to seek out people like Tim Kaine and Murphy, who, they're not good on every issue, but on this war question, we have to get a bipartisan consensus that we're not going to go into a third war in the Middle East, and that we're not going to back a Nazi coup in Ukraine to provoke a war with Russia. And the Russians are very serious. And then, Sean, the other side of this is the economic question. There's no one in the Republican Party at this point that has said we have to take on Wall Street other than Senator Paul. And so I think, in my view, he's alone in the Republican Party. Now, the question is whether some Democrats will step up to the plate or whether the Democratic Party will go the way of the dinosaurs.
Well, let's talk a little bit about humanity versus the banksters. We talked briefly before we began here about the BRICS, and you note that they're moving out of the dollar and putting together a huge fund for global economic development. This is for the benefit of their own nations. As you noted moments ago, these nations are not going to give up their sovereignty. They oppose the TPP, which is a corporate dictatorship, which of course our government and Obama is pushing. They oppose global warming legislation. They are committed to economic growth through innovative technologies which increase productivity. This is what we, the U.S., used to do, you noted in an email to me, Harley. And I'm just so appreciative of your grasp of that history and the fact that you have your eye on the ball with the BRICS, because the dollar is dying. I would call attention to an interview that we posted at the top of SGT Report on Sunday morning. An absolute must-listen. Jim Rickards' comprehensive review of gold manipulation techniques and proofs. As I made mention in the editor's note, we're very suspicious of Rickards because we know he is a representative of the establishment, as he has talked about 9/11, and he calls insider trading irrelevant. We know that. But listen to this interview, Harley, because I got to tell you, Rickards lays out and admits and talks about the central bank manipulation, how they do it, why they do it, and he talks about that the end is probably coming in the next year or two as China amasses so much gold and will eventually let the price fly higher with the full approval of the Federal Reserve. Let's talk about the BRICS. Let's talk about the shift of economic power and the hope it means for maybe the future of humanity, Harley.
Well, this is the irony that I was speaking with conservative congressman the other day, and I was briefing him on the BRICS, and he was listening intently. And then at a certain point, he said, "Are we going to have to learn about what a constitutional republic is from Russia and China?" And he just laughed. And I think that's where we are right now. Look, the Chinese have real problems with their economy. They still have a small group of people at the top. They have a lot of poor people, but they're going with economic development and investment. But not just for themselves, because they know that for China to increase their potential internal markets, they have to upgrade the nations around them. Putin has made very clear he's not going to accept the deregulated free trade banking system of the West, which Russia accepted briefly under Yeltsin and nearly destroyed them. The Indians have a pharmaceutical sector which is growing and is very powerful. South Africa, which is one of the BRICS nations, has gold, and Brazil has incredible raw materials. What they're trying to say is that their future depends on other nations in the developing sector joining them in mutually beneficial investment into future technologies and future products. What Obama is doing, as you pointed out in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this fraudulent free trade agreement, is what Obama is essentially saying is that countries have to give up their sovereignty and allow the bankers to write the rules. And when this was presented at the APEC summit in Beijing, which took place just before the G20, Obama presented the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and they wouldn't even let him present it at the conference. He had to do it in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, and very few people came. The 21 nations present signed for the Chinese Free Trade Agreement, which was along the lines of allowing certain areas of protection, but opening up trade on a broad scale as an inclusive rather than exclusive basis, as the U.S. policy is. Now, you mentioned the global warming thing. I found this really laughable. Obama said he got an agreement with the Chinese. The Chinese agreed that they're going to continue doing what they're doing. And Obama agreed that the U.S. will escalate the destruction of our industry and energy production. So he went to China and basically showed the world that he was isolated. The Russian spokesman, by the way, said that why would we listen to Obama? He's a lame duck. Now, this shifted a little bit at the G20 summit because there you had the Brits, you had Merkel, you had Harper, you had Abbott from Australia. Abbott's good on global warming, but on these other issues, he was threatening Putin on Ukraine. So the Western media has this line that everyone agrees that Putin is the devil. But the BRICS represent almost half of humanity. And as was shown in the APEC summit, another nations representing another 1.5 billion people are orienting toward this China policy. Now, is this a threat to the U.S.? Let me just mention something that the president of China, Xi, said. He said, we would welcome U.S. participation in our free trade agreement and also our development plans. They've announced over $1.25 trillion over the next 5 years of aid packages without conditions. In other words, not IMF type policies. And countries are lining up for that. Now, this is why, let me just bring up the other point that I think is really important when you talk about the banksters. As you mentioned from Ricketts, most people on the inside know that the financial system is gone. The so-called stress tests in Europe were a fraud. They left out most of the bad debt that banks are holding by letting them mix them in with what are called risk-weighted assets and also to take them off the books. Now, what the Bank for International Settlements has proposed is that since Dodd-Frank won't work and since there's nothing in place to stop a systemic collapse if derivatives start unraveling at one of the major banks, what the Bank for International Settlement proposed is something called bail-in bonds. Now, this is different from Cyprus because in Cyprus, they just took the money from the depositors, from bank depositors. And everyone knows that that wouldn't work because anybody leave money in the bank unless they're a fool. So what the banks are doing is something which is clever but equally stupid. They're going to allow banks to sell bonds to create a buffer of capital. And these bonds will be slightly higher interest rates so that they'll attract money, but they're not going to let banks buy each other's bonds. They're making them available to pension funds, money market funds, and they're going to allow them to be marketed to their depositors, saying, look, you get 0.1% interest on your savings account. We can give you 3%. So they're going to sucker people into buying these bonds. Now, what's the point of these bonds? As soon as a bank goes into trouble, those bonds are going to be used to bail it out, and the people holding the bonds will lose it. It's just another con game. But no one's talking about it. But the former top official of the Bank of England said, when he was asked, well, why do you think these bonds will work? He said, well, we can't go to the government and central banks anymore for money, and we can't go to Wall Street, so we have to go to households. This is a clever ripoff of the pension funds, which is not so clever because once people learn about it, and I appreciate you letting me present this on the program here, once people learn about it, it's going to be laughed off the face of the earth. But that's how desperate they are now for liquidity.
Yeah, and one of the things that's resonating with me, I'm just nodding as you're saying all of these and reminding us of all these things, Harley. At the APEC Economic Conference in China, it was Putin who was the guest of honor, standing in the middle of all of those who were in attendance, and on the far right, standing among the women and the wives, was Obama. I think the message that is being sent by China and by Russia and by the BRICS, by the actions that they're taking on behalf of humanity, is that they will reject, hopefully, and continue to reject the economic tyranny presented by the alternative, which is the Western Rothschild criminal banking system, the IMF, the BIS. And another example of that, Harley, we've talked about this before. It was back in 2013 that Russia signed a deal to forgive $29 billion of Cuba's Soviet-era debt. And what do we see on the flip side? We see the IMF enslaving nations to billions in debt. So the proof really is in the pudding. And we knew it when Newsweek put on the cover a picture of Putin with two nuclear explosions in his sunglasses. And the headline was, "The Pariah, the new enemy of the West, Putin." We understand how they're positioning China and Russia to take the blame for the collapse of the dollar when in fact it is the criminal policies of our own leaders that are leading us down this
And Sean,
horrific path.
Let me just say, I'm not here to cheerlead Russia and China.
Nor am I.
I'm here to say we better get our house in order because we're the pariahs now. The United States still can count on Cameron and Merkel, who's a complete empty bag of whatever. The Harper. I mean, there's power. There's military power there, but there's an empty vault filled with worthless computer notations that they're only going to be able to sustain by stealing from us and stealing from the poorest countries in the world. And now that there's another game in town, what's the reaction? There was a really funny story that's not so funny. The new head of NATO gave a speech the other day in which he said, Russia is putting troops on the doorstep of NATO. And the Russian representative to NATO said, we haven't moved our border. NATO is moving eastward.
That's right.
And, the idea that Putin is the aggressor, there was a report that came out at the APEC summit that the Malaysian government is convinced that it was the Kiev government in Ukraine that shot down the MH17. And they're demanding that the Kiev government allow more open investigation. They're demanding that the U.S. and the British release these so-called proofs they have that it was the Russians. And yet, what does Obama say? He went to the university in Brisbane and said, we understand your anger at the Russians because of the grief of 28 dead Australians that is a product of the appalling aggression of Putin. Now, that's where you see our president lying internationally, and that's why we're becoming marginalized. I look at what Xi Jinping did in Beijing and Putin and others and say that they're appealing to the Americans. Look, you rejected Obama overwhelmingly. Reject his policies. Join the rest of the world in development. Now, it's essential that the U.S. do that because you can't be 100% certain that China and Russia will do what's right. They're tending in that direction. But we have to have our American system, which is what they're trying to adopt, reinstated in the United States, which means that you have a government which will protect individual entrepreneurs and businesses and industries from corporate monopolies and cartels. Mm-hmm. And instead, what we have, and I know why so many people don't like the government, but I'll tell you this should be a government of, by, and for the people. Right now, it's of, by, and for the corporations. And the only one who can change that is the American people.
Yeah, I agree. And just to wrap up here, as you were speaking about Putin and China, and, we're not here to cheerlead them. We're just talking about the facts of the matter. And the facts of the matter are this government and the West, the UK government, the behavior of this New World Order. I'm going to continue to say that because I think it's all-encompassing. It's Canada. It's the United States. It's Great Britain. It's Saudi Arabia to some extent. These people have lost the hearts and minds. They always say, we need to go into Iraq and win the hearts and minds of the people. Well, they've lost the hearts and minds of the people in their own nations.
And the election just showed that.
It absolutely did. And so I guess to wrap up, my question to you is, if the Republicans have so much control now, and if they want to prove, there's a lot of Tea Party people in there now, if they want to prove that they're just not the opposite side of the puppet master's hand, okay, it's the right and left, both controlled by the same puppet master. If they want to prove that they're not bought and paid for, what do they need to do, Harley? For me, I think top of the list, they need to dismantle Obamacare. They need to dismantle or reform the hell out of the IRS. And they need to reject and finally put out to pasture, put to death this TPP. What else is on the list that if they are not bought and paid for, they should and will do?
At the top of my list is impeach Obama on the right basis and reach across the aisle to Democrats who also recognize that Obama is an example of a tyranny of special interests. And that's the way we can win the country back. It's got to be bipartisan. There aren't enough votes to impeach him. There really aren't, because he has veto power. There aren't enough votes at this point to repeal Obamacare. So let's repeal Obama, and then we can go at these other things. Now, I just wanted to add one point, because I've been reading the comments that you get on our interviews, and a lot of your listeners write in and say, well, Harley's an idealist. We've already lost. You can't change it. If I believed that, then I wouldn't fight. And the problem is that too many people have accepted that, even with the evidence now from November 4th that people don't want Obama in office. So it's time for us to throw our pessimism out. Stop being cynics. There's a difference between realistically understanding that there are a bunch of evil criminals who have seized power in this country. That's not cynical, that's real, as you say. But what's also real is that we still have a constitutional republic if we choose to use the power given to the people. And so I'm going to be idealistic in the sense that I know there's a minority of Americans who understand these things. It's a growing minority. And if we present the case properly, I'm still convinced we can win. And I don't want to wait until January 2017 to see Obama leave the White House, because I don't know if we're going to have a country by then.
Yeah, well said. It is up to us to take our nation back. A lot of people have given up and thrown in the towel, and I understand that, but I don't think it's too late. It's never too late. Look at what the BRICS have done, and look what the BRICS are doing. I want to call attention to your great website, Harley, LaRouchePAC.com. I see that you guys have recently revamped it. It really looks terrific. And on the front page here is this article: "The center of the world is not the United States. The center now lies with China and Russia," which, of course, we've just spoken about here in detail. Harley, I want to thank you so much for your time. Harley Schlanger has been our guest today, a historian and the national spokesperson for LaRouchePAC. Harley, thanks so much. I sure do appreciate your time, as always. You're one of our favorite guests.
Thank you, and I certainly second your suggestion that people go to LaRouchePAC.com, because there's a lot of material that will give in-depth background to what you and I have been discussing.
Well, Harley, let's get together again as soon as you would like, certainly within the next 6 to 8 weeks, and let's do a check-in on this dollar collapse. As I like to say, we are documenting the collapse. It is happening, and it does appear to be speeding up.
Okay, be happy to do that, Sean.
Okay. Guys, thanks so much for listening. We do appreciate it. Thanks for checking us out at sgtreport.com and our sister site, thelibertymill.com. We very much appreciate you stopping by to comment. As Harley noted, we do read all of them, and you can visit Harley's website at LaRouchePAC.com. Thanks, Harley.
Bye, Sean.
Bye, Harley. Bye, guys. Have a great week.